Today we headed to the Little Bighorn battlefield, which lies on the Crow Indian Reservation, the largest reservation in Montana, encompassing 2.3 million acres. The Crow tribe has a membership of 11,000, of whom 7,900 reside on the reservation. The tribe faces numerous struggles, as was clear passing through the areas of lodge grass, not the least of which were indications of methamphetamine abuse that's ravaged the community, as well as a general appearance of poverty and distress. The Crow themselves originally hailed from the Ohio area, but were driven out by warring tribes who were better armed. The Crow's westward migration was primarily due to the aggression they faced from the Cheyenne and Sioux, rather than Europeans settling the area. This partially explains why the Crow allied themselves with American forces in their fight against those tribes at the Little Bighorn, due to deep-seated historical animosities. The battlefield is a national monument that can be accessed directly off of I-90. Most visitors probably drive from Billings, so there seemed to be little need to run through some of the various towns surrounding the area, although we made a point to check some of them out, like lodge grass.
Well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. Great to have you folks here. I think there's all kinds of different ways we can tell this story, but I'm going to tell the story in this manner this afternoon. George Armstrong Custer is going to come out here and try to drive the Lakota people in Cheyenne back onto a reservation. He's going to send Major Marcus Reno, to attack the southern end of the camp at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 2 hours later, Custer's on top of that ridge in the final 20 minutes of his life. If you look out and you take away the monuments, the markers, the trails, the road, all of that, you're looking through the eyes of George Armstrong Custer and what he saw in the final moments of his life. And in the last 20 minutes of his life, the sky is raining arrows, gunfire, smoke, yelling, screaming, cursing, more ammo, more ammo! Eagle-bone whistles shrieking across the battlefield in the dust and the smoke. Warriors getting closer and closer and closer, desperately trying to destroy the soldier command and save their very way of life. Soldiers on top of the hill, 45% of them, born in a foreign country. A lot of Irish, a lot of Germans, slamming bullets as fast as they can into their single-shot carbines, and they're not going to see the sun go down. Two Moons, a Cheyenne chief, we swirl around the soldiers like water around a stone. 20-year-old Cheyenne warrior, wooden leg. It looked like 1,000 dogs in a fight. You couldn't tell one from the other. Low dog, the soldiers were fighting good. They were loading and firing and loading and firing. But then they threw their big guns onto the ground and took out their little guns and tried to kill us. But they shot wildly in the sky as their horses bucked and shot and pulled them all around. A desperate order. Shoot your horse. Boom! A bullet in your horse's head. 39 dead horses found after the battle on top of the hill. You're not going home now. There's nowhere to run to, and there's nowhere to hide except by God behind a dead horse. 30 or 35 soldiers, 6 or 7 mounted, the rest running. They bolt off the hill, charge down towards the river. Big Beaver, a warrior, said we caught them in the ravine and we killed them all. 28 dead men at the bottom of this trail, buried by Reno Benteen survivors who 3 days come down and discover the Custer dead. Those 28 men are buried at the bottom of this trail. The ravine side sloughed up on top of them. 100 years later, we can't find a shred of their existence. Not a button, not a bullet, not a bone, not a damn thing. Gall was a warrior chief in this battle. He was was 6 feet tall. He weighed 250 pounds. He looked like a middle linebacker for the Cowboys. His whole family was killed in the battle by the Arikara scouts. When a runner came into his teepee when he was painting himself for battle and said, "Your whole family's dead," Gall later said, "It made my heart mad. And I fought back with a hatchet." 10 years after the fight, they interviewed Gall, "How long did the battle last?" He said, "About as long as it takes for a hungry man to eat his dinner." And then the shots. Boom, 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 boom! Boom! Quit coming. Warriors stormed the hill, rode right into the crowd of paralyzed survivors and pounded them to death. Then they roared down to meet Reno and Benteen, who had made a feeble effort to advance to the sound of the gunfire, drove them back, pinned them down, trapped them under siege for the next 24 hours. Captain Frederick Benteen will step up for a shell-shocked Major Reno. It's a groundhog case now, boys. It's do or die. Dig rifle pits, they began to scratch and claw at the ground with cups and spoons and pocket knives in their hands. Those rifle pits are still there. 24 hours later, the massive village begins to break off and scatter to the south. Sitting Bull says, "We've killed enough of the blue coats, the long knives." Approaching military column from the north, Gibbon and Terry, and the massive exodus begins. And by the end of the day, the nightfall comes. There's hardly a handful of warriors in sight. With courage, high ground, and 25,000 rounds of ammunition, Benteen has saved 350 terrified men on top of that hill to the south. 52 are dead, 51 are wounded, but they survive. Relieved by the military column of Gibbon and Terry the next day, on Wednesday the 28th of June, 1876, they come down to bury the Custer dead. 210 men stripped and mutilated to their socks, bloated beyond recognition. It's a scene of sickening, ghastly horror. Men cover their faces with kerchiefs, and they bury their comrades with 6 inches of sand and sagebrush. There's only 9 shovels in the whole command. Custer gets the deepest grave of anybody, 18 inches on top of the hill. When they find him, he's stripped to his socks. He's got a gunshot wound to the head, a gunshot wound to the chest. His thigh is slashed to the bone, fingertip cut off, ears punctured by sewing alls by the Cheyenne women, and an arrow shoved into his private parts. His brother, Captain Tom Custer, 2 Medal of Honor recipient in the Civil War, disemboweled, head smashed to the thickness of a pancake, shot full of arrows. You can't recognize Tom Custer except for a tattoo on his left arm. TWC, Thomas Ward Custer. These were angry times. 1 year later, Sitting Bull goes to Canada with the band, stays up there for 5 years. Returns in 1881, immediately incarcerated, placed on the side of a stockade at Fort Yates. He's eventually taken to the Dakotas Standing Rock Agency. He's allowed to tour with Buffalo Bill Cody and the Wild West Show. He's often seen in New York, Chicago, Baltimore, handing money out on street corners to orphans. You can't figure it out. Why would anyone allow a child to starve in a nation that has everything? He dies 14 years later, 2 weeks prior to the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. He's arrested by Indian police officers called Metal Breasts because of a badge. They pull him out of his cabin at 4:30 in the morning, arrest him. They're going to deport him to Florida, put him in a cage. He resists. They shoot him in the back of the head. His body is thrown into a pit at Fort Yates with a sack of lye. His battle-shattered lives. Crazy Horse, legendary warrior, surrenders at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. He's stabbed in the back with a bayonet, murdered for refusing to go into a guardhouse. Crazy Horse was infamous as a warrior. At the age of 14, he seeks a vision of who he's supposed to be. The Great Spirit comes to him in a dream and says, you are to protect your people. That's why you're born and that's why you'll die. But bullets nor arrows will harm you. But don't boast, don't brag, be humble and reserved. That's totally in contrast to what a warrior is supposed to do. They're supposed to count coup. They're supposed to show off. They're supposed to do all kinds of things to catch the attention of others through bravery, courage. And that's how they get elevated in their status in the tribe, by fighting and hunting. But when Crazy Horse hears God speak to him, he almost becomes a mute. Doesn't talk to anybody. Is antisocial, stays to himself. When he goes into a battle, he strips, ties a brown pebble behind his ear, paints a yellow lightning bolt on his face, white hailstone spots on his chest, paints hailstones on the horse, ties his horse's tail up in a knot, grabs a handful of prairie dog dust, throws it on the horse, grabs a Winchester rifle and goes to war. Other warriors follow him, not because he can command them, but because of what he does out in front of them. Fearless, aggressive, relentless, hostile to white intrusion in the Powder River Country. He's 36 years of age. He leads his people as much as he can to a free life. George Armstrong Custer, on the other hand, is 36 years of age also. He's a legendary warrior in his own culture. Two warriors trapped in their own cultures, prisoners of their own times, in a fight. One's going to die on that hill, the other one's going to die a year later, both become legendary. Major Marcus Reno, second in command here, will be blamed for this nightmare. Accused of cowardice and dereliction of duty, drunkenness. 3 years after the battle in 1879, he asked for a court, a big court, to clear his name. It's held in Chicago, Illinois, at the Palmer Hotel. It still exists today. He's found not culpable, but the criticism rages on. He crawls deeper and deeper inside of a bottle to try to drown his demons, but they only multiply. He's finally booted out of the Army, stripped for drunkenness and alcoholic behavior. Dies in a Washington, D.C. hospital all alone of tongue cancer. Buried in a pauper's grave at the age of 54 in Washington, D.C. For 77 years he lay in that grave, hardly a visitor. Then in the early 1960s, his family petitions the Army to look at his court-martial conviction. It's overturned. He's disinterred, brought out here. And in 1967, he's laid to rest with full military honors and restoration. He sleeps today below the flagpole, below the Bonton, at a place that destroyed his life. Captain Frederick Benteen was a hero of Reno Hill. He will die a bitter and twisted, broken down alcoholic at the age of 64 from a stroke. 1 year after this battle, their skeletal remains all across the ground. Wolves and coyotes have ripped the corpses out of the shallow graves. The Army comes out to rebury, remound the enlisted men, but they're going to disinter the officers. When it comes time to opening up Custer's grave, it's already been defiled. There's nobody in it. They look around for bones and fragments, pieces of uniform. They can find hardly a thing. The commanding officer finally says, "Put those bones in a small hat. It won't fill it up. And nail the box shut. It doesn't matter. Because the public will believe anything That box is taken back to West Point, New York, the Army Academy, buried in the ground, October of 1877. Thousands of people come in attendance. Dignitaries from all over the country. 57 years later, Elizabeth Bacon Custer, wife of George Armstrong Custer, will die in 1933 at the age of 91. She's outlived him by 57 years. She spent her whole life, the last 57 years of her life since her husband died, glorifying and deifying his memory through 3 best-selling books, speeches around the world. Got $130,000 in the bank. When he died, they didn't have a damn thing. She donates that money to women's colleges for scholarships. Now, she's buried next to that box at West Point. If that's George Armstrong Custer's remains, she's got a smile on her face. But if that's Private Smith, she's pissed off. Ultimately, I believe, based on my research, Custer's underneath the tomb on top of the hill. He rests there today. The Custer family has been approached about exhuming the remains in the box at West Point. They don't want anything to do with it, so we'll never know. But when somebody asks you after this talk, where's Custer buried? As Paul Harvey used to say, you can tell them the rest of the story. This battle will become iconic, more shocking to the American nation than 9/11 was in our time. But today, it's a spiritual place. You can feel it. 5,000 veterans from the Spanish-American War, Indian Wars, World War I, II, Korea, and Vietnam, closed in 1979, full to capacity today. On top of the hill, where the granite monument is, 220 soldiers scraped up off the battlefield 5 years after the fight, buried below the monument. Across the street, the Indian Memorial, dedicated to the warriors and tribes who fought here in a desperate attempt to hang on to everything they'd ever had and everything they were ever going to have. Long, long, long overdue. Today, it's quiet now. The rage of battle is long gone. But it's a spiritual place. You can feel it. And all you have to do is walk up that hill to find out. Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, the place where ghosts walk in broad daylight. Thank you very much.
Just heard one of the most emotional, stirring presentations about this battle I've ever heard in my life. And we're on our way up to the monument where Custer was killed and where he's most likely buried. And I think that was one of the best presentations I've heard at any historical site I've ever been to. So, great narration. So right behind me is the marker where General George Custer fell. This is considered one of the only battles in the United States where soldiers were buried where they fell. And so these markers represent where the sentry fell during the battle.
Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, hey.
part of the memorial honors the tribes that fell during the Battle of the Little Bighorn. As you can see, the prayer flags on the statues behind me. And then this whole area in the center here has various sayings by different tribes, and a lot of the names of those that fell, just like on the stone on the top of the hill at Custer's last stand, as the names of the soldiers from the U.S. Army and 7th Cavalry that fell. So I'm glad that they added this to the battle site. It definitely gives two sides to the story, right?
So I guess when they were going through the remains, they looked for the captains and higher ranks.
Yeah, lieutenants.
Noted it.
Yep. So we're headed down right now to the Little Bighorn River.
Man, look at all these out here.
Yeah.
These markers.
And along the river, about a mile south, was where they first stumbled upon the village. Or they were looking for it. I guess they didn't stumble upon it.
This one's marked.
Geo E. Lord. Assistant surgeon.
Maybe he was out trying to help people.
Yeah.
Kill him.
Yeah, I'm sure the tribes didn't care. It wasn't like the Red Cross or anything. Deep Ravine was the scene of fierce fighting during the battle. Crazy Horse and other Sioux and Cheyenne warriors crossed the Little Bighorn River right in front of us and rode up the ravine during the attack against General Custer's battalion. Toward the end of the battle, approximately 40 soldiers broke out from Last Stand Hill and were killed here and on adjacent ridges. Warrior accounts indicate that a Sioux was also killed during the fighting and a Northern Cheyenne mortally wounded. They were recovered by their families. Approximately 28 soldiers, mostly from Company E, were found in a large heap near the head of the ravine, and others at 15-yard intervals below.
So these are the ones that these 28 were overlooked in the reburial efforts.
Oh, they were?
And since then they haven't been able to locate them. They've tried many times. 1984, 1985, 1989, 1995, 1996. Perhaps future archaeological techniques may one day solve the mystery of the missing cavalrymen.
So Crazy Horse rode right up in front of us through this ravine. That's crazy, literally. A lot of Indian scouts are buried here that were complicit with the U.S. government in helping rout out other tribes that were resisting government infringement upon their lands or forcing them to take to reservations. It's a very impressive graveyard. It's very well kept. If you've ever been to Pine Ridge Reservation, primarily Lakota, they have Wounded Knee down there, and I always think to like the way that these places are manicured that are kept up by the U.S. government versus Wounded Knee, where the U.S. government has no authority and it's left probably to you know, the reservation elders and leaders, and that graveyard just, it looks like a mess. I mean, there's something beautiful about it in, I guess, a tribal way, because the grass is long and it looks like the graveyard is almost one with nature. But there is a tendency to like Western cultures, more manicured graveyards, and so all the headstones match for the most part, and it looks very much like something you would see at Normandy or Arlington. And here's Marcus Reno, known to be a coward in battle, court-martialed, I believe. His family petitioned the army to rescind his court-martial, and later his honor was restored, and his body was eventually reinterred here. But he is not buried where he fell. He's buried in the larger cemetery here. Just beyond this hedge of grass is the area of the tribal villages that Custer spied. It was a combination of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho Indians. And that's the Little Bighorn River down there.
I hope he's not stuck. What if he's like, shit, how did I get up here?
You think he's stuck up there? Yeah, what if he's like, crap, how the hell did I get up here and how do I get back to the herd down below? I thought I would just sightsee a little. Thanks for traveling with Trey. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time.